Holy crap. We're at SAS Conf. Wow. So this is a bit of a personal dream come true for me. I used to imagine that someday we would have a big conference devoted to SAS and that I'd be able to speak at it. I didn't know if I would be keynoting at it, but that's awesome. So there's like 150 of us here, or approximately, I guess. Some people might still be sleeping. I wish I was. So you guys are pretty cool. You've come from really far away. I think we've got Germany, Amsterdam. If you're from Europe or some other exotic place, shout it out.
Boston. That totally counts.
Tokyo, awesome. Taiwan, I've been there. Yeah, so I came from sunny California. And I'm thrilled to be here. So 5 years ago, like, I don't know, like a lot of you here probably think that the battle is like Sass or less or stylus or whatever, but it wasn't at all clear 5 years ago when I kind of came onto this scene that CSS processing was even going to be a thing. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to pitch the idea that like using a language to write your style sheets was a good idea. And I think, as John showed, there were a lot of people who had this really visceral reaction to, like, why would you do that? and in fact, like, Sass, I'd been using Sass for maybe 6 months or a year, and I went to a Ruby meetup, and I ran into Kyle Neath, who's the lead designer for GitHub, and I'm like, hey, man, are you guys using Sass? Because you're Ruby, and it's Ruby. And he's like, no, CSS, man, that's how you do it. Good CSS all the way. And so I'm really happy to hear that they're using it now. It's a really great story. So that's Paul Irish at Google I/O. He was presenting new features in Chrome that they're going to be able to release soon because of the features that are coming out in Sass. And I just want us all to stop and think about it for a second, that there's going to be checkboxes in Google Chrome that say the word Sass. Whee! So yeah, like CSS preprocessing is one. This is not the argument anymore. Maybe it's about which preprocessor to use, but it doesn't say stylus and it doesn't say less. But I'm glad those things exist, because one of the things that validates a space is that you have options and that there are competitors. And if you aren't having an argument about which one to use, you're having the argument about, should I use it? It's weird. So every day I'm actually thankful that less exists so that people can look at it and say, I'll use the good one. There are some really amazing things about less. I don't want to be too down on it. They make it really easy to get going with CSS preprocessing. Way easier than Sass, guys. So like to John's point about using Sass in the browser, they nailed that, and we lose the installation battle every time. So we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. So how did it happen? How did we get here at SAS Conf with 150 people taking up their weekend, traveling far distances to talk about a technology? And I'm going to say that probably the biggest reason is passion. So I want to tell you guys a few stories about my passion for Sass. And the first is that I've always thought that CSS sucks. I used to have an interview question that I would give to anybody that came to interview at my startups, and I'd be like, if you could change 3 things about CSS, what would it be? And if they didn't have an answer, I was like, you're not thinking about the world right. Like if you're looking at CSS as this thing that is good and you're levying it for web development, you're not being critical of your own ecosystem. So really early on, I found Sass right around just before 2.0, I guess. And I was just blown away. I'm like, variables, yes. Nesting, this is beautiful. And I went to my first Ruby Conf that year, just an attendee, wasn't speaking or anything. And I was kind of just like a deer in the headlights, just didn't really, I'd never been to a tech conference before. I had my family with me, so we just kind of hung out as a family, and I went to some talks, and I came back with them. And on my way home, I sat next to this gal on the plane, who I found out was also a RailsConf attendee. And I spent like an hour of this plane flight telling her about Sass. And I just think she must have been like, who is this guy? Like, why is he going on and on about this technology? And then I sent emails to people like Hampton. I'm like, dude, I have made some style sheets and I want to share them with people. How do I do that? And I didn't get a reply. Where's Hampton? He's not here yet? Slacker. And like, I don't think they got it. Like, I don't think they saw a something in Sass at that point that I saw, which was this idea about sharing. And so I really set out to tell people about Sass. And I started commenting on blogs. If there was something about CSS, I'd be like, yeah, but Sass can do it better. Check this out. And I would add all these exclamation points and put colons in front of things. And for those of you who don't know what Sass used to look like, you'll understand why the people who saw my replies were like, this is a crazy person. And I tweeted a lot, and I told everybody else that they should be using this great thing. And I think I might have been the first Sass hole. Sorry. So I don't want us to be sassholes, and I've already made a few jokes about less and things like that, and I think that's really sassholey of me. I think we should be more positive as a community, and I strive for this. And so, like, be positive when you're out there interacting with the public. If you're on Twitter, like, try to keep things about good things about Sass and not about bad things about other things. And when you're evangelizing it, try not to be a crazy person. I know you're excited. I've been there. But like, a softer touch seems to be much more effective in getting people to use it. And so like John said, like, show what you're making and amaze them with your productivity. And I think that is a really great way. So how did we get here? I would say we really got here through giving. A whole lot of people have given time and energy to Sass. There's a really early user of Sass. His name is Brandon Mathis. And he couldn't make it here today. I'm sad about that. He's on the Compass Core team now. But a long time ago, he was a web developer working on a website, and he sent me an email saying, hey, I saw you talking about Blueprint and semantic selectors and things like this, and I was wondering if we could chat. I'm like, sure. And so I chatted with him one time on Skype, I think, and we just had a really great conversation, and Compass was kind of a thing, but not quite yet then. It might have been released already. And I got him on board, and he was so excited about it. And I spent a lot of time actually training him personally on how to use it because we had like 15 users or something. And he asked me, like, why are you spending all this time with me? It doesn't make sense. And I was like, I don't know. You seem excited about it. Maybe you'll take the things that I teach you and teach 10 more people. And then those people might teach 10 more people each. And in this way, we can spread this idea of CSS pre-processing. So he's given talks at conferences now, and he's released his own open source frameworks, and he has his own blogging platform now. And he wasn't doing any of that stuff then, and I feel like it's this little tiny spark, it's a small investment. It was a couple hours of my time. It wasn't that big of a deal, really. And I see a lot of you guys doing that exact same thing, taking the time to respond to people on Twitter, answering questions on Stack Overflow, writing blog posts. It's amazing. A lot of you are giving code, giving patches to Sass, to Compass, making your own frameworks, releasing gists, making cool pens on CodePen. And every time you do that, you're helping grow this community. And of course, we're all giving a ton of knowledge. So we go to meetups. How many of you have given like a tech talk at work? Oh, I love you. I don't think a hand was down there. Like talk to someone in a hallway, just like telling them like you were excited about this. I mean, some of you are doing podcasts, yeah? There we go. And of course, speaking at conferences and holding meetups or going to meetups, it's so amazing. And 7 years in, we have built a community, and I think we can be really proud of this. So please give yourselves a round of applause. So John gave a nice little history of Sass timeline. I'm going to take a different perspective on the history of Sass. So like I said, Sass is about 7 years old now. It all began with FA5048BA 405609273E4 74A50400C7243 FB FF5E4FE. Damn it. Where Hampton committed the initial Sass-tastic stuff. I didn't look at how big the code base was then, but around Sass 2.0, which was released on May 23rd, 2008, we had a whopping 19 files, and it made up 52K of source code. At this point, Sass had variables, concatenation, mix-ins without variables, and some output formats, and this weird syntax that vaguely resembled Ruby, but was really strict about indentation. And there were two commits I want to point out in that release. One is a little patch by a guy named Gary Hill that made mix-ins for Sass. By any chance, is Gary here? I want to hug you. I wish you were here. So mix-ins obviously were like the thing that I really feel like transformed Sass from being an alternate syntax to a new paradigm. And I don't know if anybody knew on Wednesday, April 9th, 2008, that was going to change web development, but I think it did. So good job, Gary. Yeah. And then there was a little tiny patch by a guy named Chris Eppstein in that release where he fixed a bug. But that was my first commit to open source. And I don't know, have you guys, raise your hand if you've made an open source commit. Beautiful. didn't that feel awesome? Like, wow, like you've like helped your fellow man. And I think because it was my first time, I got really attached. So I joined the Sass team, and I think at that point in time, like really Sass's mission changed from being this alternate syntax to creating abstractions that could enable an ecosystem. And I don't know if we stated it explicitly as much back then. It was more like, hey, I want to share some things, and my style sheets are ugly. But as Nathan and I talked more and more about the things that we were making, we saw that there were a lot of features that Sass brought to the table that could make it easier for people who had expertise to share their style sheets with people who didn't necessarily. And so we released Sass 2.2. About 13 months after Sass 2.0. This is where arguments for mixins came in. We added looping, conditionals, and this was when Compass was released out of a beta for the first time, because there was no way Compass could exist without these features. In point in fact, it was those features that really prompted the creation of less. And so I think they're contentious. This idea of bringing programming into style sheets was offensive to people in some really visceral way. Like they weren't into it. But I don't know, I never read a bunch of CSS books and like bought into like this is how to write CSS as much. And so I didn't know that I was doing it wrong. I just felt like this felt right to me. And it helped me do some cool things. So I was like, okay, go make your own thing. But Les did some really cool things and really showed us some places where we were messing up. And one of those was with respect to syntax. And I had seen it in all of my discussions and talking with people at just how much the syntax of Sass caused people to reject it. They said, hey, this is weird. And actually, I think the thing that was weird about Sass was all of the things it brought to the table in terms of abstraction. But they couldn't get their head around that, so they would just focus on the syntax and say, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to use that. It's too weird. So Sassy CSS came out, Sass 3.0. So back then, Nathan was a senior in college, and he wasn't, his classes were not terribly challenging, and he didn't have very many of them. And so we saw this huge explosion in Sass 3.0 to 61 files and 323K. And I gotta tell you guys, so I was like 30, I can do math. I was 34 at the time, and I had been programming for a long time, and I watched Nathan, who'd only been programming for 3 years or 4 years at this time, take Sass and make it from this little toy language to what I think was a beautiful piece of software. And I didn't do much of the coding back then. I did some stuff around the edges. Mostly was working on Compass. But I got to see a view of Nathan at work that I think no one else has really probably been privy to. And it was really beautiful. And I just read through the code, and I'm like, I'm amazed. So, and I think Sass 3.0 is the reason that Sass really hit mainstream. We hit the Sass syntax right, and the quality of that code has been second to none. And like, I have crazy ideas all the time. They're just terrible. And Nathan is a good counterbalance to me in that he'll be like, yeah, no. And the ones that I think are good ideas, I push back on, and that's how we end up finding features. So the point is, yeah, Nathan's great. Everybody, give him a round of applause. Our goal in that release was really to out less. So they had claimed that they were going to do the CSS syntax right, but we felt they had made so many mistakes in terms of how they were using the syntax. And so we were like, we'll take your philosophy. We think that's resonating with people, and then we'll take it to its natural conclusion. And I think that was the goal of SAS 3.0. So then we went on to a few releases, and I think these were just us like fine-tuning things. So in SAS 3.1, we got custom functions in Sass, keyword arguments for functions and mixins, color functions. Color functions are awesome. I think color functions might be one of the few features early on that like migrated from Compass into Sass. And we got lists and iteration over them as like first-class variables. And then moving on to 3.2, 16 months later, we had made our way up to 104 files, 541K of Ruby code. And a little bit of Ruby goes a long way, people, so that's a lot of Ruby code. And so here is where we added mix-in content and placeholder selectors. And so I think those have been like some of my favorite features. Lately, I've been just having so much fun with them, especially mix-in content. If you guys get a chance, check out some of the latest contributions I made to Compass and check out what we're doing with mix-in content there. And I think you'll see that it's really a groundbreaking feature. It's not just for writing media queries. And so here we are in October 2013. I didn't update this morning because we landed a bunch of code yesterday. So there's probably more files and more bytes now. But we're up to about 120 files. And the project has gotten a little complicated. And I have a hard time keeping it all in my head. We have really great unit tests, fortunately. But Nathan, he keeps it in his head pretty well. So pretty happy to have him pulling most of the weight there. But I want to talk to you guys about a couple of things that have happened recently. So I think after SAS 3.2, Nathan came to me, he's like, I'm tired. I have been killing myself on this project day in and day out, and I need a break. And I'm like, I hear you, man. Take some time. And I did my best to step up and like fill in on the issue trackers and did a couple of bug releases here and there and answered questions on the mailing list, etc. And after about 3 or 6 months of that, I burned out. My startup had gotten to this point where we were pivoting to a new business model, and I had to work really hard on that. I was working like 80 hours a week. I have a wife and an 8-year-old daughter. She was 7 at the time. And Compass and Sass, and I was just really burned out and did a lot of crying and came close to divorce and a few other really bad things, and I just needed to simplify my life. And so I took a break from Sass and Compass for a while and focused on the things that were really important to me, and that's my family. And all the while, though, I was just racked with guilt because I felt like I had made a promise to y'all that I would keep your style sheets up to date. And there hasn't been a Compass release in a really long time. And there's some, if you search for open source guilt, you actually will find a lot of blog posts about this. It's a real thing. People who contribute to open source freely and of their own time don't always feel like they even have the permission to just take some time off. And it's not because there's the +1s coming in on the bug every day saying, please fix me. But that's part of it. It's also just because I think open source people really, truly want to contribute, and they just don't always have the time. So the way I've simplified my life was I went out and I found a job where I could work on Sass and Compass. And so LinkedIn was really amazing, and they hired me. And my job there is to be an open source hacker working on Sass and Compass and to help them get their Sass and Compass infrastructure sorted out. And so now my passion is my job, and I love it. And I look forward to going into work every single day. And I don't have to sacrifice time with my family to help y'all out. And so I am loving life right now. But the mountain of backlog that was Compass has been incredibly daunting. And so I've been struggling as to how to really get my momentum back. And it turns out deadlines help. So thank you for having SAS Conf. Because I've been working my ass off for the last week, and I have found a newfound passion for making this project amazing again. So, all right. Let's talk about some of the new shit in SAS 3.3. So I just gave a talk in Berlin, and it was recorded. Nico was there. I forgot your name, but you were there. And is there anyone else that was at CSS Conf.eu? Right, so it's recorded, and you can go online and watch it. And so I'm not going to give that talk today. I wanted to give a different talk. But briefly, some of the features that we've added are source maps. So this is debugging your style sheets. Your browser, well, Chrome at least, will know how to get from a place in your CSS in the inspector to a place in your Sass file where that was defined. And you can see actual Sass code in your browser, and if you turn the right features on and set things up the right way, you can edit it in your browser, hit save, and see your page refresh live in your browser without doing anything, kind of like live reload. It's really an amazing workflow. We're adding a new data structure called a map, which, if you don't know, is an association between two pieces of data. And if you've ever tried to program without maps, you'll understand why that's a big deal. Another thing that we're doing is we're moving the ampersand character, which is your selector context. We're not moving it, but we're making it available to Sass script, which means that when you're writing code inside of your Sass files, you can figure out what your selector is and change it and manipulate it. So that slide that John showed where you said ampersand plus ampersand, and he's like, you can't nest this, it won't actually work, it won't give you what you're expecting. We can fix that now. In fact, I have a gist somewhere that actually does that particular thing. And it's not trivial code, but you can do it. You can manipulate your selectors and just grab the last bit and do that as the plus and keep the whole left side kind of how you want it. Cool. Yeah, it's super awesome. Like, you can also figure out if you're at the root of a style sheet. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to have a mixin that used ampersand, but then you tried to use it at the top level and it would break. So now you can just test. If ampersand is null, you're at the root level of your document, so you can just branch on that condition. The problem with ampersand inside of scripting is we don't know what you did with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe you looked at it and waved hi. So we had to add a new directive called @root. And what that does is, when Sass sees an ampersand in your selector, we'll say, okay, you're taking care of the context, so all those selector parents that you've nested, we won't include those automatically for you when we concatenate it together. So at root is you guys having the ability to say, this stuff, I got it. I'm going to be in charge of my context. But it's not just for writing ampersands. It's also for just getting back to the root level of the document in any sort of deeply nested context. And so if you've ever been inside Mixin and needed to extend something but you're inside a media query, say, and you were like, how am I going to do this? Okay, I'll just extend something. And then you got this weird message from Sass saying, this is deprecated and you're going to be broken when SAS 3.3 comes out. And you didn't know how to fix it. There's a good chance you can use at root to fix it, because what you can do is say without, or with rules, or without all, and that would bring you back to the top level of the document. You can now extend whatever classes or placeholders you want to extend and pop back down into your context after that without having to change the way you've really written your mix-ins. And it makes a really nice API. So I think that's probably been one of the most contentious issues, is people complaining about that warning. And I think this will probably be the escape hatch for those last few use cases that were still valid, but by and large, that wasn't a valid use case. So we can handle that now. We added a bunch of string functions, so you could just manipulate strings. And I've shown in one of my talks how you can camel case things or dasherize things and do other fun string manipulation stuff. And you can ask, does a mixin exist, or does a function exist? Is a variable defined? All of these things are new meta capabilities in SAS 3.3. So that isn't necessarily a feature that people are going to use all the time, but as framework makers, we're getting more and more complicated, and we need to have dependencies on other projects, so it might make sense to say, well, if this project is at the version where they defined this new mixin, I want to use it. Otherwise, I'll have some fallback plan. So just some nice ways for us to take advantage of asking Sass to help us build and maintain frameworks at scale. We've added the ability to pass a map as keyword arguments to a function or a mixin. I rewrote the watcher so that it was using the latest version of listen, and the problem in Compass, where Sass and Compass were depending on different versions of the watcher code or the watcher library. That's all taken care of now. The if function works, so if you have the variables, if the condition to the if function is true or false, only the part of that function that is the result will actually be evaluated. So you can put something invalid, like a list access or something like that, that would be outside of bounds in that branch condition. Trailing commas in lists. This is often considered a convenience feature, so that if you have a long list, you can add another row without having to tack on that extra comma. But in Sass, it's much more powerful than that, because who here has ever tried to create a list with one value in it? Did that work? Now you add the comma, and you have a list with one element in it. It kind of worked in Sass with lists with one element, but what happened was if you had a list that had nested lists, then your code would get horribly confused very quickly. So this is a great way to work around that little issue. You can now set a value in a list and access reverse from the end of a list with negative values. And there's a bunch more features that are in the changelog. So that's just the quick rundown of what we've built. I was using it to work on some of the new stuff in Compass, and I was having so much fun. I felt like Sass was out of my way for probably the first time, that I wasn't dealing with the crappiest language that could possibly fit inside CSS. I was dealing with something that was actually fun. So what's new in Compass? So we've got a bunch of new CSS3 modules, animations, transitions, placeholders. I think I've missed a few. They've been added up over the last year or so. So That's all there now. I think masks were just released like 2 days ago as something that's fairly stable, so I'll probably throw in the masks module before this release. The big feature that I just added last night is that we've rewritten the CSS3 module from scratch on top of the data from caniuse.com. And so what this means is you'll, instead of setting like, please turn on the WebKit prefix for this particular feature or turn it off or whatever, you'll just be able to say, I want to support X% of my audience, 1% or 0.5% of my users. When a browser version falls off because the number of users drops below that threshold, if I don't need a prefix anymore, get rid of the prefix. And when you change your threshold, the prefixes just adjust. And as new data comes out from CanIUse, as things become unprefixed, it's all just going to stay up to date, and the code inside of Compass actually it will stay the same. So this is huge, and for the maintainability of the project, I feel like as a web community, we can coalesce around one place to have a canonical store of knowledge about what versions of what browsers have what features, what prefixes, etc. So this is, thank you. For the first time, like I got so many bugs are like, can you please take this prefix out? It's not necessary anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but LinkedIn needs it, you know. So now I don't have to make those trade-offs. LinkedIn can set their percents to 0.01% because that's a lot of users. And you guys can set it to 1%, or someone said 10% on the Twitter. I'm like, it's just an extra prefix. We removed Blueprint, and there won't be any more grid frameworks in Compass. Finally. And a feature that I'm going to be adding is the ability to have multiple asset load paths. So you can go find your JavaScripts or your fonts from multiple different locations. And I don't know if you've ever tried to like create personal frameworks or other things like that. Like, it's really straightforward to get your style sheets into your project. But if there's images or fonts, it's like a nightmare. So this solves that problem. You'll be able to configure Compass and tell us where those are and what URLs they're served from, and we'll take care of the rest. And a ton of bug fixes. So without further ado, I would like to announce Maptastic Maple. That's our code name for SAS 3.3. And Nathan, can you do your dirty work, please? Excuse me 1 second, guys. Oh, you're not looking at what I'm looking at. That's boring. It says, pushing gem to rubygems.org, successfully registered Compass 013 Alpha 5. And if Nathan has pushed his up, which I'd imagine he's done, if you are feeling inclined, you can gem install Sass -pre and gem install Compass -pre, and you will have the new code. Please submit bug reports. All right. I don't know who that is, but I Googled Maple on Google Images, and she came up, and I thought she was pretty awesome. So don't tell. I'm sure it's probably copyrighted. So that's kind of where we are today. And I have 10 minutes to talk to you guys about some of the stuff that's coming up in the future. So the future of Sass. We have really great plans for a module system. I don't know. exactly what it's going to look like right now. And one of the things that I'm hoping we can accomplish when we have a bunch of people here together is to really nail down kind of what we're looking for from a module system in Sass. So like if you have thoughts or ideas about that, find Nathan, find me, find Hampton, like tell us your thoughts so at least we can consider them in all of our brainstorming. But kind of at a high level, our goal is that you'll be able to import stuff from another module. You'll be able to manage your namespaces and avoid collisions between two mixins of the same name. You'll be able to override a mixin, but still call the other implementation if you need to. What else? You'll be able to decide if you want the selectors from an import or not. A few other things like that. So those are kind of the rough outlines of what we're hoping to get. And this will be basically SAS 4.0 feature. All of this stuff is at least 4.0 or beyond. Nathan has some ideas about how Sass can automatically optimize your output. So if you've got a bunch of things like maybe media queries repeated over and over again, maybe they don't need to be repeated over and over again and they could just be in one place. It'll depend on what you've written in your style sheets about whether or not we can reorder things, because the order really matters in CSS. But in as much as we can look at the style sheet, see what properties are being used where, we might be able to make things a bit tighter for you guys in terms of the output. And of course, we intend to keep addressing all of CSS's faults. They do their best, but I feel like the authoring experience falls behind in the goals to make things fast and backwards compatible and all the other things that CSS needs to do, and those are important things. But we'll keep making your experience using those things as nice as we can. I also want to announce that we're going to move to a new release strategy. You might have noticed that those SAS releases were all about a year and a half apart. And I think this is a good thing for the community. I think it gives us a chance to get some new capabilities, absorb them. Oftentimes they've been related to each other in certain ways. So I think as a community we've been able to create a stable basis for you guys moving forward, but like bringing those releases together is a non-trivial effort. And so we're going to try out moving to a model where every time we have a major feature, that goes out. Minor features that have happened since then will go out with it, where major feature is defined as something that we consider major. And so we'll try to do a new release just as often as we can land like something big. So that means the source map code that landed on master like 6 months ago should have been already released. It should have been released six months ago. And rather than waiting for all these other features that we knew we wanted. All right. So the future of Compass. So as I said, I have a newfound energy to like work on this, get it back in shape. And so really my goal right now is to fix the bugs that are open, merge a bunch of pull requests, remove a bunch of cruft. Like there's a table striping mixin from 2007. It's terrible. Don't use it. It needs to die. Like things like that are just going to go away. And I'm going to call that 1.0, and it's going to be done. Like there may be bug fixes, or as Sass changes, we might do patches to keep that stable. But I'm not going to go forward with a ton of new features, because you'll be able to update your browser data and your stats by just downloading a new Can I Use data file. It should make it easy for you to keep up to date without even upgrading your code. So if you end up stuck on 1.0 for some reason, you can't upgrade, I think you won't be left in the dust because of that change that's going to be in 1.0. You may not get the newest modules or whatever, but then we're going to start working on 2.0. So what is 2.0 going to be? So my vision for that is a whole lot less Ruby and a whole lot more Sass. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I feel like the Ruby roots of of Sass are a bit of an Achilles heel now, and much in the same way that our old syntax was. One of the most reasonable objections I hear to getting Sass in use in a particular company is they don't use Ruby, and they don't want Ruby in their stack. It's just extra complexity from an operational perspective. And so a lot of those people end up picking less or stylus because they're using Node. And so there's a really great project by Hampton over at MoveWeb called libsass, and it's an alternate implementation. And as I've started to imagine how Compass could operate in a multi-Sass implementation world, I've realized that the Ruby that's there is going to be an impediment to that. So less Ruby, more Sass, a really small footprint of capabilities that I can port to different source languages like Ruby or C, and then hopefully Compass can be a tool that we can take to whatever JavaScript implementation or C implementation, or even still keep using with the reference implementation that's Ruby. Another thing that's going to be in the new direction of Compass going forward is to really start focusing more on how can Compass give you tools that makes working with Sass easier, as opposed to how can Compass make tools that makes using CSS easier. And this is simply a function of kind of my role and how it's evolved over time, and I just don't feel like I'm the right person to say that's the best practice in CSS. That man over there, Eugene, he knows a lot more than I do about that sort of thing. So he should release some plugins for Compass that really nail those best practices at the CSS level. And other people here, you guys all know so much more than I do. So as a community, let's figure that out. Let's figure out what's going to be the right other core libraries to use. But I think in 2.0, we're going to move away from Compass doing a lot of stuff around maybe even clear fixes and things like that. So that's the future of Compass, kind of my vision for it right now. Okay, so I have 2 minutes. Yay. All right, I might be just a tad bit long. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we've accomplished as a community. So we have 14 million downloads of Sass at last count, almost. Over the last couple of years, we've had almost 2.5 million unique visitors to the Sass website, almost 10 million page views. So it's getting pretty big. We've managed to obtain corporate sponsorship, and I mean, maybe people think that's a bad thing, but I got to tell you guys, every major open source technology that succeeds eventually gets to this point. So I think this is a major accomplishment in our trajectory of winning. We have 5 books. I bet there'll be 15 by the next SAS Conf. So I want us all just to pause for a second and give ourselves a pat on the back. Pat your neighbor's back. We're not done though. As I mentioned, we have a bunch of missing features in Sass. We've got to get to Compass 2.0. We really need a better Sass website. I hope we can make this happen very soon. We have all the right people here at this conference right now. So let's get that project that Gina and Team Sass have been working on, and let's sort it out and get it launched soon. So as GitHub has pointed out, with their style guide system, I've made blog posts and talks about style guides. Style guide, style guide, style guide. I go to conferences about CSS now, and it's just style guides. But there's not a tool for this. KSS kind of gets it done. There might be promise there, but I think we should explore as a community to find a couple of solutions about auto-generating our documentation and style guides and make it beautiful and make it easy and make it possible for someone to type compass docs or something like this, and boom, beautiful website, you're looking at it, you're navigating through your style sheets in a gorgeous way due to like what you're looking at, what your style sheets are and how to use them, like what GitHub has done for using Git. So that would be really great. Unit testing. So this is a thing that like a couple of weeks ago or a little bit longer I was thinking maybe we're in bad shape about, but Eric Meyer has released a plugin for Compass called True, which allows you to test your style sheets. And I'm using it on some of my most recent stuff, and it was amazing. Just yesterday, James Kyle announced boot camp. Is he here? No? Okay. Anyways, I hope I'm not wrong. But so yeah, he announced that, and that looks really cool. It's like more BDD style. If you don't know what that is, I'm sorry. But anyways, so that's different kinds of testing. It's like really natural language-y way of like writing your tests. But we need to rally around these guys and give them our support. We need to figure out like what other things we want to test and make it possible through the Sass language or whatever else. So rally around as an ecosystem. Who here has released some Sass code? It's like at least half of you. I have no idea where it is. I couldn't find it. There needs to be a place that we can go to and search for things and find canned solutions that give me buttons and fonts and typography and beautiful and fully baked plugins like Foundation or little tiny assemble-it-yourself things. It doesn't exist, and it needs to. And I intend to find someone at this conference to lead this project. If you want to be that person, come talk to me, and we will rally behind you. Linter. We do not have a linter. A linter is a thing that looks at your code and says you're doing it wrong. And so it's not okay for Sass to give warnings about things that you decide are okay, because they would just keep happening over and over and over again. But a linter is something you can configure, and it'll tell you that you're doing things okay or not according to the rules you've set up. So we need one of these. Every other language has one. We don't have it in Sass yet. And in terms of, like, are you writing good CSS? Are you writing good Sass? You can't enforce those coding styles without a tool like this, and it needs to happen. If you want to be a person, especially if you know Ruby, who writes a linter for us, come talk to me. We'll rally behind you. It is too hard to install Sass. Gem is a disaster. I love it. It's great for Rubyous. I understand it, but most people who are installing Sass don't know what Gem is. They just type it in, and then if it doesn't work, they don't know what to do. So we need a one-click installer that you can download off the internet and push a button, and you have Sass. And then maybe some of the Ruby arguments will go away. And oh my God, it's too slow. Like, as it's gotten bigger, and as it's gotten more complicated, and as style sheets have gotten more complicated, it can take seconds, 10 seconds. I've heard people say longer to compile one style sheet. Maybe that's your fault, but I can compile so much Java and so much C so fast, and my Sass code is like, so we need to fix that. I intend to put some effort into how can we make the Ruby implementation more optimal, but I also want to tackle this by getting behind libsass and seeing what they can do. They're always going to be trailing behind in features. It's been a year and a half. They still haven't finished 3.2. But if you don't need all the new shiny, but you need really fast, maybe libsass is the right implementation for you. And lastly, guys, CSS still sucks. And And so one of the things that I'd really like to do when we get things sorted out and moving smoothly with Sass and Compass is get LinkedIn to join the W3C and go sit on the CSS working group and try to help them out and offer my opinions and write specs for them. We'll see. It's a lot of work to do those sorts of things, and I'm not sure if I'm going to have the emotional energy for it, because they tend to make me angry. But at the very least, what I have been doing is working with people on the working group. I'm on a first-name basis with a bunch of them now, so I can at least bend their ear when I feel like things are not good enough. But I feel like we just lead by example, and they're following. They've added variables now, and that is because of Sass. It was not going to happen. For 10 years, they argued about variables. Sass came out, and they're like, fine. So we can do it. And that's because you matter, okay? We matter. And I want you to understand that where we are today, 7 years in, it might feel like we've gotten so far, but really this is just the beginning of a really amazing community. And next year at SAS Conf, I want to see 300 people in the audience. And I want you guys to be the ones saying, man, I was there at the first SAS Conf. There was only 150 of us. So amazing. Because web development is changing, and we are changing. I feel like as web developers, we're craftsmen and we really want good tools. And the web technologies that exist are not quite getting it done for us. And so what we're seeing now is the inmates are starting to run the asylum. The people that grew up on the web are starting to take over defining what the web is. People on the CSS working group are people who have built websites now. Really. Like, that was a thing. There were people for the longest time, and hardly any of them had actually built a website of any size. And now that exists. There's a group called the W3C Technical Architecture Group, and they define at a really high level what the web is supposed to be. And recently there was this huge effort to get a bunch of web developers onto that group. And so 3 of them joined the tag. And that's a big deal because although you're not going to see it, some really smart people are sitting back going, how can we turn the web into a platform? And as the platform gets better, things like Sass make sense to be in the browser. So this vision that I've had for all these years of, can we just please have this for everyone, might happen someday. And so I want you guys to understand, you actually are part of a new generation of the web. Maybe me, I might be a tad too old. And you guys inspire me. I love talking to you. I love helping you on Twitter and on mailing lists. I love helping you solve your problems. It makes me happy every day. And I want to just keep doing this for as long as you'll let me. And I think together we can do great things. And happy styling.